Welcome to class. Today we are going to talk about fundamental communication skills. Communication is an overused term. We all understand it, we all do all the time. But today in this class we'll talk about fundamental nature of communication, human communication system, and what are the skills required to be a good communicator, an effective communicator. What are the things that we need to develop, and what are the myths about communication? See, usually we believe that somebody who speaks at a very high speed, pace of delivery is very high, somebody who uses, let's say, very ornamental and complex sentences, or somebody who is using very low frequency words. Low frequency words, I mean words which are not usually used in everyday conversation. We consider that person to be an effective speaker or an eloquent speaker. But speaking too much, speaking at a very high speed, or speaking low frequency words, using complex structures, long sentences, they are not characteristics of effective communication. Because always remember, the communication has communicability, right? The essence of the message which is received by your listener, by your receiver, that counts. It doesn't matter how great speaker you are, it doesn't matter how eloquent speaker you are, but if you are not able to communicate your idea to ordinary people or to anyone whom you want to communicate with, or your receiver does not interpret and receive your message, communication doesn't happen. So it's not about complexity of sentences, it's not about low frequency words, it's not about very sophisticated style of speaking, it's not about speaking in a fake accent, sounding like an American or a British or a native speaker. It's about translating your ideas into sentences and communicating those ideas in easily understood sentences to your audience. That is important. So, in all communication event, the speaker is important, but the most important person is your partner in communication, the receiver. So, communication is you-centric, not I-centric. If you are not able to understand, then it doesn't matter how beautifully I speak, how eloquently I speak, what kind of complex sentences I am using. It's of no use. So, communication has to take place only when, and it takes place only when your message is delivered and received by the receiver without any distortion and ambiguity. So, today we are going to talk about how to develop effective communication skills, right? And I'm not going to talk about rocket science, I'm not going to tell you ABC or step 1, step 2, step 3 of communication, developing communication skills. I will be talking about very common general things. Most of you are familiar, but it is kind of reinforcement. So, I will be just mentioning and underlining those factors which you may already be knowing, right? So, look at communication, right? It is the fundamental human need, and which enables us to share. And it is the sharing in terms of our thoughts, ideas, emotions, intelligence and information which we possess, and this is what helps us survive and evolve as a person, as a society, as a race. So, that's very significant. With changing of time and space, communication challenges, communication needs have also changed. Today our challenges are different, and so are the means of addressing them. But what remains the same is the role and relevance of communication in the course of human survival and success. So, communication is central to our everyday activities. I mean, everything that we do, anything that we do, it happens where the communication is at the center. So, centrality of communication, this is what I want to underline. Now, if you look at the fundamental premises of communication, see, communication has an objective, it has a goal. It's not done without purpose. Every communication has a goal, a need. It is done with a purpose, right? So, we need to understand the motive, the goal, the objective, the process, procedure, and the outcome of this entire communication event. So, we communicate with a purpose, right? And it is a two-way process. It's not a one-way process. It's a two-way process. So, when we say two-way process, that means when you communicate, you have a partner to communicate with. So, when you send a message, somebody receives it. Sending happens only when it is received, and receiving happens only when something is being sent. So, it's always a two-way process. So, that is the first fundamental premise of communication. Then, can we consider any sending of the signal and receiving of the signal, sending of the message and receiving of the message as an event of communication? No. There must be exchange and progression of ideas. That is the second premise, right? And the third is mutually accepted goal. So, goal of communication must be mutual, right? There must be continuity, exchange and progression, and it has to be a two-way process. So, this is how communication happens, right? So, there are three fundamental premises we need to understand. It has to be two-way process, then only communication happens. There has to be exchange of what? Exchange of messages and feedbacks. So, when I am sending a message to you, I receive a feedback. Feedback ensures that you have received the message and also decoded it appropriately without any ambiguity. So, intended message has reached you, right? So, it ensures, your feedback ensures that. So, communication, the second premise is exchange of message and feedbacks and progression in a certain direction. And the goal of communication of both the partners must be mutually accepted, right? So, this is how we understand fundamental premises of communication. Moving on, then when we say effective communication, what are the things which make a communication effective? Right? As I told you, communication is not about speed of delivery. Good communication is not about using complex sentences, long sentences. Effective communication is not about using low frequency words or literary ornamental sentences. It's about being relaxed, composed, using simple sentences where message is important, not the format. Content is important, right? So, when we look at the content of communication, it must be brief. And what do you mean by brief? Brevity is a character of good communication. That means your message must be succinct, precise and to the point, straightforward and to the point. If you have excess of words and complex sentences, saying the repetitive sentences, saying the same thing in different words, repeating, somehow brings your impact down. So you need to be very brief, you need to be very clear, you need to be very objective. So the message must focus on the content. It must be objective. And being objective means it doesn't allow your audience to interpret openly, right? It detects ambiguity and does not allow your audience to have multiple meanings out of it. You need to understand that creative writing is different from, let's say, professional writing. Why? Because creative writing gives a lot of imaginative space to the audience. It is open-ended, the text is open-ended, open for interpretation. But in professional domain, we cannot have this luxury of allowing the audience to have open interpretations and ambiguity and multiple meanings, deriving multiple meanings out of it. So it has to be objective, straightforward and precise. Being simple is most challenging thing, because we have this tendency of making things complex unnecessarily. That's not required. So you need to be simple. And when we say simple, you need to have simple sentences, small sentences, appropriate pauses, full stops, commas, punctuation marks, right? So that it does not give a lot of cognitive load to the audience, to your readers and listeners to interpret what you want to say. The pace, for that matter, the tempo, for that matter, must be appropriate and slow. It's not required to speak in a very fluent and high speed delivery. You don't have to deliver in speed. It has to be appropriately paused at places, and tempo must be slow. Speed must be appropriate. And you have to customize it, you have to adjust it as per the need of your audience. Right? We cannot afford to have the same style everywhere. Your style is customized, your approach is customized, your message is customized according to the need of your audience. And as a speaker and as a writer or as an user of language, you need to understand the need of your audience. Because always remember, you are communicating, talking or writing not for yourself. You are involving another partner, your audience, your reader, your listener. So the message must be clear, it must be simple, it must be objective and precise. Right? Intelligible, and effective communication is intelligible, easy to comprehend. So it doesn't give challenges to the audience to understand it, right? It doesn't give challenges to the reader to understand it, because then you lose the purpose, you fail in that if you are not able to make it intelligible and easy to comprehend. And finally, most importantly, it has some value for your audience. So what you are saying, what you are writing, it must carry certain value attached to it. It must be useful. Because we receive a lot of messages every day, but we don't assign equal value to all of these, right? So we filter which message is important for me. So unless your message is useful or has certain values for the audience, they will not receive your message. So in order to be effective communicator, you need to learn this art of being brief, being clear, being objective, being precise, being simple, being intelligible, and message being useful. So these are attributes to effective communication. Moving on, then what language skills are required? What language skills are required to be a good communicator. So there are four. There are four integrated language skills, and we say integrated because they are not independent skills. They are integrated, and as a whole they make you effective communicator. So what are these? L, S, R, W. 4. L stands for listening, S stands for speaking, R stands for reading, and W stands for writing. Why do we call it integrated skills? Because these skills appear in this order naturally, and when you acquire even your first language, your mother tongue, you start with listening, input, and then speaking, output. So there is a myth that listening is a passive skill. It's not a passive skill. Reading is a passive skill. It's not a passive skill. Speaking is active, writing is active, listening and reading are passive. Listening is very active skill, but it is receptive in nature. You receive. So you actively receive it. So we call it receptive skill. Similarly, reading is also very active skill, because you may look idle while reading, but actually your mind is not idle. It's very active, and very much active and hyper. But you receive the input. So reading gives input which is manifested in your writing, that is active skill. So listening is receptive, speaking is active, reading is receptive, and writing is active. So there are 4 integrated skills, and we need to polish, hone our skills in all these 4 areas to become a better communicator and to become a better user of the language. So by no means listening is less productive. Speaking is of course productive. Obviously it is perceptible, we can see, we can observe. But listening is equally active but receptive. We receive the input. So listening is input oriented, speaking is output oriented. Similarly, reading is input oriented and writing is output oriented. So we need to understand this integration of these skills, right, and be a better communicator. So in order to become a better communicator, we have to have good listening skills. Then only it will feed into our speech production. Similarly, you have to have a very good reader to have appropriate input for your writing and orthographic productions. So you need to understand the importance and significance of all these 4 skills, and all these 4 skills are equally important to be a better user of language, right? Unfortunately, the way we have been educated in our schools, we have learned grammar, English grammar in class. Listening and speaking skills were hardly given a chance to practice. So we focused more on reading and writing, right? But 2 skills were ignored. But at this stage in your professional domain, you need to be a good speaker, and for good speaking you cannot avoid this, or you cannot ignore the significance of listening. Similarly, you need to give a lot of writing output in your professional domain, but you cannot undermine the significance of reading to improve your writing skills. We'll come to each of these skills by and by, but let's move on to listening skills. How to improve your listening skills. So one is called active listening. What is active listening? That means you are actively engaged with the speaker, right? You are following the utterances, sentences, you are continuously receiving and decoding it. You are able to understand it with attention and concentration. You need to understand the accent of your speaker, right? Not all of us speak in the similar accent. We all have our own, style, our own diction style, our own, renditions. We all have different style of speaking. But that's the beauty of human mind, and that's the beauty of human language, that despite these idiosyncrasies and individual centric language characteristics, we are able to decode, we are able to understand each of them. Sometimes accent can be challenging for you, because if the English speaker is a native speaker for that matter, the speed will be very, very high for you as a non-native user of language. So, non-native user of language will have little challenges in understanding the accent of different speakers. So, we need to pay attention to understanding various accents, right? European, American, Canadian or Indian English is definitely different. The speed, our speed is a little slower compared to the native speakers. So, you need to understand the accent, number one. Number two, you need to understand the word boundaries and structure. So, what do you mean by one word boundary? In a flow, in connected speech, we have lots of allegiance and assimilations of sounds. And sometimes, if you are not very attentive and if your ears are not tuned and trained, it will be difficult for you to understand and identify individual words. So, you have to train your ears, tune your ears to understand such assimilations of sound, such allegiance, and understand the word boundary. Where one word ends, the other word begins. You need to focus on that, and you need to tune in understanding different accents and different pace of delivery. Then you need to understand connected speech. In writing, you can see full stop, you can see a comma, you can see a colon, you can see a dash, you can see a hyphen. So, these punctuation marks are orthographically presented. You can see them and you can understand the word boundary. You can understand, because words are written separately. Each word is separate, right? A space and then another word. So, this space between two words allow you to understand the word boundary. But it does not happen in listening, because pauses can give you a clue about sentence boundary. Pauses can give you a clue about clause boundaries, but not the word boundary. And specifically when the speaker is native speaker or somebody who is well competent in English and speaking to you fluently. So, you need to understand the connected speech, these boundaries, and lots of allegiance and assimilation that happens in there. Then speed is another problem. While listening, speed is another problem. Possibly with lots of attentive sessions you give to yourself, and lots of tuning in with the sound of English, and also understanding the pace of delivery of the speakers, gradually you will cope up the speed of delivery, right? Then you need to understand the details of the content, what content is being delivered. You need to understand the detail, and for that you need to understand the tone, so the segmental and suprasegmental features. You need to understand the sounds, you need to understand the combination of sounds and words, you need to understand the word boundaries and phrases, you need to understand what phrases and clauses and sentences, where the one sentence ends, another sentence begins, right? Content, the meaning of it. So, you need to understand the detail of it to be a good, effective, emphatic listener. You need to understand overlapping speech. So, if 3-4 people are talking at the same time around you, or you may be one of them. So it's never the case like, radio transmitter where one person says Charlie over, then other person begins. In connected speech, in interactive setting, in a group, when you communicate, you will have lots of overlap. Not only that, you will have overlap within the speaker as well, because one idea overlaps with the other, one sentence overlaps with the other sentence. Sometimes you have half finished sentences. So you need to understand these overlaps, right? You need to understand the context in which the text is being used. Then the cross cultural information, a lot of cross cultural information, intonation for that matter, right? Discourse markers for that matter, or fillers for that matter. You have fillers all the time. So then the style of different speakers, right? And you need to understand a range of topics. So you need to do all these things, and they will come to you gradually, nothing to worry, but you need to do a lot of practice in that. And for that you need to be exposed to a variety of sample speech with different speakers with different background, and gradually your ears will be tuned, you will be able to understand accent, elision, assimilation, connected speech, speed. So it will help you develop your listening skills and become an emphatic and active listener. Moving on to the next skill, that is speaking, right? So it's a productive skill, and it's very dynamic and productive skill, right? So you have to focus on how to speak intelligibly, clearly, right? How your sounds are clear. Again, I repeat, speaking good English doesn't mean speaking like an American or speaking like a British. You don't have to speak like anyone. You use English the way you want to use it, right? And there is no inhibition. You shouldn't be embarrassed if you are not able to speak like an American or British. You have your own style, and let me tell you, every speaker has his or her own style. So you don't have to sound like an American or a British or some other native speaker. Mind you, English is not your native language. So don't be embarrassed. Be confident. What is most important is speaking intelligibly. So what you are speaking must be clear to everyone who is listening to you. Doesn't matter what accent are you using. This is your own style, use it and be confident. Speaking fluently. But fluency doesn't mean speed. Fluency doesn't mean speaking many words per minute. Speed is not important. What is important? The continuity of your idea. So if your idea, your thoughts, your content is continuous without a break, and if your audience is able to follow you without interruptions in the idea, you are fluent. If you are not making obvious efforts, perceptible efforts, observable efforts, if you are appearing effortless, if you look effortless and speak at your own speed and intelligibly and confidently, you are a good speaker. You don't have to have high speed of thing. Your tempo must be appropriate, pitch must be all right, and that is it. So you don't have to sound like anyone, right? You own it and derive pride out of it that you can speak intelligibly without interruption, fluently. Fluency refers to the continuity of idea and the content, right? Not the speed of delivery, pace of delivery. Then paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is an art When you are talking to somebody, when you are giving a public speech, when you are making a presentation, or you have a group of people following you, listening to you, you will get a feedback that what you said may not be understood by them the way you intended originally to be understood. And in that case, you need to paraphrase it. You need to repeat it in a different word, in a different style, right? Elaborate it. That is the sign of a good and confident speaker, when you can elaborate what you want to say in many ways, right? In multiple ways, to suit the need of your audience, right? So, and for that you don't need to make a lot of effort. You will get the signal from your audience, you will get the feedback from your audience that they are not able to follow you, and in that case you need to paraphrase. Then we need to imply a lot of and employ a lot of communication strategies, right? We'll talk about such a strategies later on, but a strategy is like connecting with your audience, giving them space, making yourself accessible and flexible, right? Looking effortless, right? And engaging with them, responding to them quickly, right? And it becomes very evident in the face-to-face interaction, right? In your professional domain, you may have to appear for interviews, right? That is, so there you need to have interactive skills. You may have to give many presentations, short time extempore presentations, right? You can speak fluently when you have this ability to form opinion, look at things, observe them, understand them and form opinion. Then only you can express them effectively. In your job settings, possibly you may have some group discussions or formal presentations. So for that you need to be ready, and you can be ready only by looking at these small things. They are not rocket, this is not a rocket science. Only thing is that you need to identify the areas where you need to work on, and there are so many resources available now that will help you develop your speaking skills. Moving to the next skill, developing reading skills. As I told you, reading is very active skill, right? So the moment you look at a text, we get some idea like what this text is all about, what kind of text is this, what it may contain. So your thought process begins before you have started actually reading the text. So pre-reading skills, where you are able to see, understand and guess broadly the text and anticipate what is coming, right? While reading, that means when you read, right, your thought process also follows the text. Sometimes the reading can be slower than your thought process, because we quickly reconstruct what is coming up, we anticipate the next thing coming up, and that increases the speed of your reading. Post reading exercises, which means post reading, after the text is over, actually you have completed the text, but the text is not over in your mind, it is continuing, right? So lots of assimilation goes in, right? And you develop your opinion, your thoughts about the text, about the contents of the text. So this engagement with the text starts before you start reading the text, it continues while you read the text, and it is followed up after you finish reading the text, right? And that is a gradual process. It comes to you slowly, depending on how intensely you read and how frequently you read, how much time you devote in reading, right? There are two things, there are two styles of reading, skimming and scanning, right? Skimming refers to reading without a preconceived notion, where you just skim through the text and get to know what is there in the text. Scanning refers to an anticipated preconceived idea with which you approach the text, and you exactly identify that information you are looking for. Deduction refers to the overall deduction that you make after reading. So, in order to become a good communicator, you have to have a very wide range of reading. You have to have good speed of reading. You have to have this art of engaging with the text and making deductions out of it. Then we move to writing skills. So, after listening, speaking and reading, though all the three above give you a lot of feedback and input to your writing production, and for writing there are certain things we need to be prepared with, like a wide range of vocabulary, right? You have to have fairly good command on high frequency words, and when we say high frequency words, that means words which are used frequently around you in everyday life, and also domain specific words, we call them jargon. So, if you are talking in term technically, or you are making a technical presentation, discussing a technical issue, you must be familiar with the jargon and the technical words used in that domain. Then you have to have this command on structures, grammatical structures. So, you should be familiar with grammar. You do not have to be master of grammar, but you have to be good enough in translating your ideas into simple structures. How to do that? So, you must be able to choose from a wide range of available words, right? Which word fits into a particular context. So, appropriacy of selection you must be familiar with. So, you have to organize while writing. Before writing, you have to organize your ideas, what exactly you want to write, right? So, collecting your ideas, then organizing them, and then we engage in drafting, right? And then editing. When you draft something, you must be reading it from the reader's perspective and see if there is any gap, see if there is any punctuation marks gap, because a single comma or a hyphen or a colon can make a difference in meaning. And always remember, written text speaks for itself and writer is not there to explain. So, the reader is free to interpret. So, in order to limit the distortion and ambiguity in your text, it must be punctuated appropriately. So, full stops, commas, dash, colons must be placed appropriately. The selection of word is also very important. So, words must be selected carefully so that they carry the intended message appropriately. So, they fit into the context and carry your intended message effectively. Paragraphing. So, in each paragraph, one central idea is called nuclear sentence. So, every paragraph has a nuclear sentence and all the arguments are built around it. So, when you change the idea, you must change the paragraph. So, you must make another paragraph. So, paragraph tells you the flow of idea. and in each paragraph we have one nucleus sentence and all other sentences are qualifiers. They elaborate the idea and make it a single meaningful unit. So you have to have this art of paragraphing. And of course, everyone and all of us are individual user of language. So we all have our own style of writing, speaking. We all have our own style of choosing particular word for a particular context. But what guides them, what governs this whole selection is the appropriacy, structural appropriacy, semantic appropriacy, meaning appropriacy. Depending on the intended message, it must be structurally appropriate and semantically appropriate so that your message is encoded appropriately and the receiver or the reader of your text is able to interpret the text the way you want the reader to interpret, right? So it comes with a lot of practice. So these are fundamentals of effective communication, and towards the end let us quickly understand that being a good communicator, right, does not require you to speak at a very high level speed or use low frequency words or use ornamental language or have complex sentences. It's all about being simple, precise, clear, intelligible and effective. And little practice, a little awareness and consistency makes you a good communicator. So this is for now. Thank you very much.